It's Wednesday, June the 5th. Good morning and welcome to Morning Brief. We're live for you in Lagos. I'm Kayode Okikulu.
Well, it's a day to reflect on the progress made so far and, also to reflect on life. Life will give you only what you negotiate. And as you do so, keep hope alive because the best is yet to come. Good morning and welcome to the Morning Brief. I am Bukola Koka.
Well, I must thank Nigerians this morning for being civil through the challenges of the country. Sometimes we forget us as Nigerians. We talk about the government, but the people have been very patient with the government, trying to show understanding, even though people complain and rant and all of that, but they haven't done anything that is uncivil. We must appreciate all of us for keeping faith and hoping that the people that we're keeping faith with will just step up their game to do what's responsible, to do what is needed and needful to ensure that things are turned around for the better for everyone at the end of the day. Welcome to the program. I'm Jeffrey Uzoma.
So I have a proposition this morning, because a lot of things we deal with in the country, globally, generally, they're symptoms of an illness, right? So you could talk about some of the policies of government, the outcome of it. Those are symptoms. The illness itself, people have said, particularly here, is a leadership challenge. So one of my propositions, which I think some people have echoed in the past, and wait for it. I'm testing the waters here. We'll take it to the National Assembly later, but let's take it to this morning brief assembly this morning. So there's this thing about the terms, the titles that we give leaders in this part of the world. So, for example, someone is called honorable by default, just by attaining a position, not because of honorable acts, right? Or His Excellency, not as a result of the excellent work that is churned out through the person's governance. Person just earns it. So it's like you earn your certificate the first day you get into 100 level or first year, whatever. You earn first class, not even a pass, not a fail, you earn first class. So I think that's a bit tricky. So how about we wait until the end of the tenure and then give out the term honorable, excellency,
distinguished,
that's all of those things. How about we wait till the end of their tenure? So if a person is not as excellent, we can say averageable. It doesn't sound right? But your average legacy or something like that. I think it would make more sense. So it reminds them that, oh, wait, I have to earn it. I have to do something, or at least do my very best to earn those titles. I know it's a big debate. I know some people say it's as strong as our Constitution, but I feel that might drive the message home the more.
Fantastic point to make, Kadi, but I think it's a matter of perspective, and it's like that big elephant, depending on who's touching it, they may be touching something very different. It could be the tail or the tusk or even the scaled body. So if an honorable is not an honorable by the time that they attained during the swearing in, I wonder if they would be honorable by the end of the tenure. Exactly. If a president is not an excellent president at the beginning, of the career, they may not be excellent. So it's just a nomenclature, if you ask me. And, getting to that position in the first place should speak of, the hows. How did you get there in the first place? Was it by excellent means, as the presidential candidate of the Labour Party said, after the loss? So was it by excellent means? So these are the things that the leadership should reflect on. And what they say about the followers being deserving of the leaders that they elected. So even the followers are leaders in some way by themselves. So they should be reflecting on how they're leading themselves as well. Jeffrey.
At the end of the day, I like Kayode's perspective, but Nigerians have chosen a perspective already. So let me give you Nigeria's perspective. I've always said that under our law, you are innocent until you are proven guilty. So whether you're His Excellency, you're honorable, you're distinguished, as soon as you win that election, be clear that you're corrupt in the eyes of Nigerians. You're not a good person, you're one of them. That's how Nigerians see you. So in Nigerians' eyes, what has happened is the fact that you are one of them. You're already guilty of whatever it is they are alleging that you're guilty of. You now to walk back and prove that I'm not like the rest of them. Which is why when a few leaders make some spark in terms of leadership quality, we say, this one is different. So I'll give you an instance. In this administration under President Bola Tinubu, one of the first spark of hope that we had was Olubunmi Ojo. He said something and he did it. People were like, okay, he's doing his work. Right. He's really doing his work. I'm not talking about whether stealing money or not stealing money. I'm just saying just doing your work now. So it's a good thing you're proposing, but in the eyes of every Nigerian, look, you're already one of them. Okay. Unrope yourself from the whatever is used to tie all of you. So that is the dilemma every political office holder has. The reason is simple, because for years, successive governments have failed us. So in the last 25 years, we've had 5 people lead us. 2 of them from the military background, 3 from civilian background. Whatever we're dealing with as a country today is as a result of the decision of 5 individuals, right? At least in the last democracy. Oh, there you go. That's how powerful leadership is.
So we're dealing with a tough issue this morning, but that is not even close to what we have for you on the show. So let's get right into it, shall we? Now that Labour has, in its words, relaxed the nationwide strike for 1 week, we count the losses on the one hand and then closely watch how government and the unions make use of the 1 week window. So, what should the government's minimum wage template, which the president has directed the minister to present, what should it look like? And more importantly, what's in it for you, whether you're a worker or not? We'll find out on the show.
Well, to answer that, Labour says they're concentrating on value, not volume. Will Labour be able to get that? And that's why this next bit of the conversation is, as the nation negotiations continue on the appropriate boost to Nigeria's minimum wage, the natural question is, will increased productivity follow suit? So join us as we explore the strategies to maximize productivity and efficiency in the civil service and the nation at large. The apex human resource management body in Nigeria is our guide.
Plus, the very exciting part of this show for all of us right here is the fact that you are part of it. Your reactions, we're tracking them as you post on X. So we keep watching that space to take your reaction amplified on WhatsApp. So all of this is what happens at the end of the day. So bring it on. That's how we call it, okay? It's a community show. So post on X, we'll track that reaction and we'll amplify it right here on the show on the morning brief.
So let's get to it, shall we? And let us know what you think. Hashtag CTV Morning Brief and on that number on WhatsApp, particularly about this, Your Excellency,
distinguished, honorable,
and the rest. Is this something we should, just go along with? Because these things actually, the words matter a lot. So you tell me I'm Your Excellency, I think, oh, I'm doing excellent stuff. So let's know what you think on the show. But we're starting off with our top stories that will shape the conversation. Come on, guys.
I don't just know what it's. I don't know what's amusing me.
It's the morning brief.
A good time to be amused. These are hard times, so we'll take any form of amusement that we can get and give you, share some of them with you also. So stay with us.
All right. The top stories on the brief this hour. It's the morning after the organized labor suspended, or in its words, relaxed its nationwide strike for 1 week. And President Bola Tinubu has directed the Minister of Finance, Wale Edun, to present a template for a new minimum wage. The Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, said this in Abuja after a federal government delegation on the new minimum wage met with the president. The minister said the federal government is not against the wage increase, but is determined to ensure that whatever figure is agreed upon is one that government can pay.
We thank Labour that they have suspended, through to their awards last night, they've suspended their strike early this morning. And government on its side, you can see that the president has just summoned a meeting of all those who negotiated on behalf of the federal government, led by the Secretary of the Government of the Federation. We're all there to look at those issues, and then the president has directed the Minister of Finance to do the numbers and get back to him between today and tomorrow, so that we can have some figures ready for negotiation with Labour. Let me say that Mr. President is determined to go with what the committee has said. He's also looking at the welfare of Nigerians. Like I've said earlier, government is not against, it's not an opponent of Labour discussions, it's not an opponent of wage increase. But what is there is that government is always desirous of ensuring that there is a balance between what government pronouncement is and what the realities are on ground. And therefore, we'll work assiduously to ensure that whatever we do, whatever promises the government makes will be kept. That's the idea of this meeting. Wage award is not just that of the federal government. Like I mentioned earlier, the subnationals are involved, the organized private sector is involved, the labor is involved. It was labor that staged a step out during those proceedings. Now that we have come back to the negotiating table, all of us will work together again assiduously within the next 1 week to ensure that we have a new wage for Nigeria that is acceptable, that is sustainable, that is also realistic for all Nigerians.
And after grinding economic activities from midnight on Monday, Labour leaders have returned to the negotiation table under the National Tripartite Committee on the review of the minimum wage. Speaking to journalists after suspending the strike, the NLC president, Mr. Joe Ajero, said the organs of the two leading Labour centres considered the commitment of the president and agreed to suspend the strike.
For 1 week, that was our agreement. And even international conventions, they say you don't negotiate at gunpoint. So whether they thought that they were negotiating at gunpoint or whatever. So we didn't suspend, we relaxed. When our statement comes out last time, we relaxed our actions for 1 week. So that we can negotiate. Yesterday's meeting was kind of mediatory meeting. And then we're going back to the appropriate organ that discusses wages. So we've returned back to status quo, ante alone. So the status quo was the 497 and the 60,000. So depending on good faith, we can move up and down to reach an agreement. But if not, another statement.
Meanwhile, the National Tripartite Committee on the review of the minimum wage is confident of reaching an amicable resolution before the expiration of a 7-day ultimatum. The Minister of State for Labour and Employment, Mrs. Nkiruka Onyeji, has stated this following the resumption of negotiations.
The truth of the matter is that we will improve. And whether there's a figure in mind, you will know that at the end of the day. They walked out and then we called them, pleaded that they come back to the negotiating table. We were expecting that everything would come to an end and then we move forward. Because there are a lot of things to do. We've wasted too much time on this. We have a lot of things to do, and the mandate of the Ministry of Labour and Employment is to make sure that poverty is reduced and that we create jobs or create wealth. So why would we sit down and just be wasting our times when we know that time's waste for nobody? So I'm optimistic that we're going to come to conclusion of this so that we'll be able to move to the next level.
And out to the National Assembly, where the Senate says it is worried over the shutdown of the national grid and disruption of flights as a result of the nationwide strike by organized labor. The President of the Senate, Senator Godswill Akpabio, and others indicated this during the commencement of plenary as he halted a further debate on the industrial action.
Let us see what we can do in persuading both labor and the federal government in looking at between 75 and 90,000 naira, and every party should stop at that, because if they postpone for 1 week and nothing is doing, look at pulling down national grid. Mr. President, is not an easy job. That national grid might take another 3-4 days to come up, because shutting down a national grid, starting it up, is a problem.
If we want to debate, we'll begin to question a lot of things. For instance, shutting down national grid could amount to economic sabotage. Stopping children from taking WAEC means that you have set those children back by 1 year. Stopping the hash is not only religious sacrilege, it's also unheard of. So there are so many things involved in what is going on. So my personal opinion will be that we thank them for agreeing to go back to the negotiation table. We urge the federal government to expedite action on negotiations in order to arrive at something that is acceptable, at least acceptable to both parties, or something that is reasonably acceptable to both parties. And then immediately thereafter, since the last minimum wage has expired, as an act of parliament, they should immediately send us an executive bill for us to commence work.
Well, away from industrial actions, President Bola Tinubu has emphasized the need for the country to invest in infrastructural development, considering her growing population. The president made this assertion while commissioning the arterial road N20, which he named after Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka in the nation's capital, Abuja. He says the commissioning is another testament to his government's development agenda to transform every part of the country.
Your momentous and recommendation to name this road as Wole Soyinka Way is well received. The population of Nigeria is growing. The population of Abuja Capital Territory is growing. It is necessary to invest in infrastructure to sustain the growth and bring economic prosperity to our people.
And now to Rivers State, where Governor Siminalayi Fubara is declaring that the worst is over in the political crisis that has confronted his government since he came into office a year ago. He says the state government is now working to deliver quality service and signature infrastructure projects in line with his administration's People First mantra.
As a government, it is our duty to make sure that we support our own, more especially when you are contributing to peace and development of our state. I'm happy to identify with our brother. I know that the man, nobody is perfect, but in his own little way, he tries as much as he can to make peace his major gift to the people of Okrika. I know I don't need to be told how much he spends to make sure he makes people happy. I identify with you. And I want to appreciate you for standing with us. Like I said, the worst is over. What we are doing today is looking forward and advancing our states.
Security now. The Coalition of Northern Group, CNG, and the Center for Community Excellence and Human Rights Agenda Network are lamenting the security situation in Zamfara State, saying that the threat to national security must not be allowed to spread any further. The two groups in a separate press conference in Gusau, the Zamfara State capital, said there's urgent need for a multidimensional approach to reduce the spate of banditry and other forms of insecurity in Zamfara State. Meanwhile, Zamfara State Governor Dauda Lawal says his administration is committed to the security of lives and property of the people of the state, with inauguration and passing out parade of the Agro Rangers Marshals Corps of the NLCDC Zamfara State Command, which is aimed at ending conflict and ensuring peaceful coexistence among farmers and herders in the rural communities. He commended the NLCDC for their initiative, and he said that this is coming at a crucial time and aligns with the commitment to embracing effective measures in the fight against insecurity.
I'm delighted to witness this significant event of the passing out of the Agro Rangers of the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps Zamfara State Command. This initiative comes at a crucial time and in line with our commitment to embracing effective measures in the fight against insecurity.
An international response organization, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, is raising the alarm over worsening malnutrition crisis, especially among children in northern Nigeria. The country representative for MSF Nigeria, Dr. Simba Terima in Abuja, added that inpatient facilities in northern Nigeria recorded over 100% admissions, which he attributed to the malnutrition crisis and poor access to health care. Let's talk business now. The central bank says there are no plans to withdraw the license of some banks. According to a press statement by the bank's acting director of corporate communications, Haka Sidi Ali, the Nigerian financial system remains safe, sound, and resilient. He says banks have begun submitting implementation plans for the banking sector recapitalization program, which will lead to increased capital in the sector. And outside the country, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is poised to keep power for a third term, even after voters dealt the Hindu nationalist a stunning setback by denying him an outright majority following an election dominated by high unemployment and inflation. The outcome unnerved investors, with stocks falling steeply as emerging results showed that Modi will, for the first time since sweeping to power in 2014, depend on at least 3 disparate regional parties whose political loyalties have wavered over the years. Well, let's talk sports now. The Super Eagles camp in Uyo keeps swelling by the day ahead of Friday's World Cup qualifier against South Africa, and that's as a result of the arrival of 5 more players: Shemi Ajayi, Calvin Bassey, Bright Asai Samuel, Frank Onyeka, and Paul Onuachu. Well, their arrival was earlier delayed by the Nigeria Labour Congress strike and the TUC strike as well. And only 3 players, Alex Iwobi, Ademola Lookman, and Maduka Okoye, still being expected, which I understand. In fact, some of them are arriving already, and Super Eagles started preparation for the FIFA World Cup qualifiers on Sunday. After Friday's match against South Africa, they will be meeting Benin Republic on Monday. So those are your top stories at this hour. But let's take a look at what you are saying about those stories. Bukola joins me.
Hello again, Kayode.
What do you have for us?
Quite a lot from Nigeria, and some of them will make you chuckle, and some of them will, interestingly, make you also think.
Nigerians never disappoint.
They never disappoint, and they've been talking about the shutdown in the national grid following the commencement of the strike and the implications that it had on the economy. So perhaps that's where we should be starting from this morning. And the first person has something very funny to say. This is from Viva XY, who says, the person starts with an exclamation. The people in my area didn't know the national grid was shut down because they hardly supplied electricity.
There you go. So we're starting off with that all-important conversation on the electricity angle to this labor union strike, essentially. So have you gotten light in your area, as they always say? Let us know. This next one is from Vocal Bean. That's at Bean Vocal. Says there was no difference in my area. We didn't even notice any grid was shut down. When Nigeria begin get light, that's what this user says in Pidgin. Well,
it's a sad situation, and it's something for the Ministry of Power to reflect on. This one is from Mr. S at Shea Sonny, I believe. To off light easy, to on and back come hard. The inconvenience is just too unbearable. Where the TUC president said categorically that all of the organs of labor have been activated to return service to those critical sectors: power, health, education. And in fact, he said that there were notices to the effect that WAEC exams should not be interrupted. So perhaps they were not implemented, we wonder.
Well, WAEC came out to say that, this is being threatened. So did they get the memo? I personally, power in my area was restored very late last night, and this strike was called off earlier in the day, about maybe 7, 8, 9 hours earlier. Well, this next user, that's AYT Walulua, says, and at this time, this tweet was put up last night, says EKEDC has not restored power for us at Mushi and its environs. He says heat is unbearable. That's the definition, or that's the interpretation of heat, 1Q Pesino. And this is an appeal to EKEDC to help. So AYT Walulua, let us know if the situation has changed this morning.
And lastly, on this subject, we have this one from at KOGB09, who says, well, it's actually trying to say that kudos, boys. Well, you see it there. Kudos to the Electricity Workers Union for the speed of restoration.
Okay.
Not Kudus.
Yeah, but Kudus is a name, but well, ex-users can be like that. But let's take a look at what people are saying generally about organized labor suspending that strike. And we begin with Patrick Creams on this one, saying the NLC have tried, and I totally respect this present leadership. So let the negotiations continue for us to see what can be achieved in the next few days.
And this next one is from Narrow Scope, who says, I believe they have agreed on a common goal. The expected demands have been ratified by both parties to end the strike. To end the strike now will erase the smear it will perpetrate if it is dragged for long. The abeyance of the strike will bring normality and set activities in motion.
And this next user,
that's if the figure is indeed one that is agreeable to both parties, and in fact to all parties.
Absolutely. So we wait to see. This next user is calling for some sort of creative approach to negotiations. Imran Share, that's the user, Zando says, going forward, I urge the NLC to devise a means to pressure the government rather than shutting activities. And particular attention is paid to the health sector, saying those involved have their patient going to private hospitals and schools. So essentially, he's saying that the people that feel the strike the most are usually the masses who use public facilities like the hospitals and schools and the rest, while those who are in government most times use private hospitals, private schools and the rest. So,
This next talking point is about the president handing down that order to the Minister of Finance to present a new minimum wage template. Now, there are so many sides to this, but before we explore that, let's take this one from Mushe Bolaton, who says, I hope the presentation also factors a cut in recurrent expenditure covering a lot of irrelevant things. I hope it sets the tone for an executive order mandating the MDAs to use Nigerian cars. His third point, I hope it will propose a cut in the allowances of government officials.
Okay, I don't know if the mandate of the tripartite committee covers that, but those are the points that we need to focus on right now, ensuring that we're more efficient. But this next post from Ahmed Aliyu is short, straight to the point. So take a look at what this user says. Here you go. The government should consider 120 to 150,000 naira. As they'll say, shikena. That's, I added that. But that's his user's post right there.
Yeah, right. And this one is from Ibuku Adewale, who says, how many directs this and directs that? No implementation. Well, we hope that this will be different. But speaking of the implications of this directive, does it mean that an agreement has been reached already and this template is cast in stone? Does government not have a template for minimum wage, ahead of this negotiations that started as far back as February? Why is this directive coming at this point in time?
Very vital points, particularly because it looks like it was Labour that pushed the hand of government. I mean, the former bill, as it were, expired in April. So usually the government should take initiative, but the Labour had to push the hand of government. But I can tell you for sure that behind the scenes, some sort of agreement is being reached, but we'll see how that plays out in the coming days. So what we'll do is get your comments much later on the show, so keep them coming in. First, on the conversation we had earlier on and the major talking points. But we'll start off with our expert panel on the show this morning about the minimum wage issue as it concerns you and I. So stay with us right here on The Morning Brief.
Welcome back. And of course, we're talking labor, federal government disputes over wage, and the negotiation continues based on that resolution reached 2 days ago. They said they'll be meeting every day for 1 week to come up with something that will excite organized labor. Well, labor is saying we haven't suspended our strike, we only relaxed that. They will explain what all of that means. But we're being joined in the program right now by a senior economist and from SPM Professionals, Mr. Paul Alaje. Mr. Alaje, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you so very much for having me.
As always, you know, when it comes to these issues, we drag you in to come and provide perspective as much as possible. So the natural place to start on this particular one, Mr. Alaje, is what you make of the back and forth between labor. Now, labor say they have relaxed the strike. Federal government say, we're going to do better than 60,000 naira. Everybody is looking for a way out of this impasse, some sort of a middle ground. But from an economist's point of view, what do you see?
Well, on the 29th of May, 2023, the president has hit a ball. An economy is like a snooker board. When you hit on that white ball, you want to pot either blue or red, depending on the team you are. What is important is before the end of the game, don't pot the black ball. He has pot a ball to increase government revenue by removing subsidy. That the action of hitting that ball will affect other balls. All other balls cannot remain the same. That is the rule in playing snookers. So what are the other balls that have been affected? There has been increase in cost of living. Inflation has gone sporadically high, now at 33.69%, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. We have also seen other things that have been affected, even to the point of the cost of energy. We have also seen that on the 15th of June 2023, exchange rates had been floated. In fact, the central bank called it flotation of exchange rates. And because of these two actions, which means playing on a snooker board, so many other boards have adjusted, have changed in position. The question is, how soon can we bring compensation? And in bringing compensation, are we sure that we will not shut down our economy? There comes your question. What is the average? What should be done? The first is, like the last time I had this conversation with you, I took you the memory lane, and we agreed that the average minimum wage, especially for new government, has been around $100 to $150 per month. What does that mean in today's figure? If government says it wants to pay $100 equivalent per month, what it means is that we'll be looking at an average of we'll be looking at about, if you want to pay 100K, we'll be looking at $2.2 to $2.3 for labor per day. If you multiply that by 30, we arrive at some figures, which is still not up to the amount we think it may be up to what government should pay. But generally speaking, my advice would be that if we must pay minimum wage in Nigeria of today, with the given current economic realities, with the given high cost of living, I think what we should be looking at for both labor and government will be to be talking around 100,000 and between 100,000 to 150,000. I understand that government don't have this money. I understand that this will also affect the private sector. But paying less than 100,000 as minimum wage will be that we want to compensate people in poverty. And I will tell you this, for someone to live below poverty line, such person must earn or spend less than $1.95, approximately $2. If you use today's exchange rate, maybe 1,450, but comfortably 1,500. 1,500, that's in Naira, times 30. Then you see what that will come to. It will come to about 90,000 naira at the end of the month. That is, you multiply that by 2, multiply that by 30, then you see, multiply that by 1,500. You have about 90,000 naira. That is for people to barely escape poverty bracket. But we are not going to pay anybody just because we want them to be around the corridor of poverty. There must be a buffer that should be provided. And that is why 100, 120, 150 will be a reasonable place to be because of state. Because let me tell you this, when this money is paid, it's going to generate, you know, it's another snooker board. You want to also eat another ball. There are other balls that will be affected. And it's important for us to know what we're about to do. If we don't pay increased minimum wage, people are already poor. People are earning below poverty line, which can make other nations to even laugh at us as a nation, which is not really good for us, for the image of our country. But when we take this decision, there are other things that will happen. One, we're going to see increase in inflation. In the next 2, 3, 4 months, we're going to see inflation figure go up. How do we manage inflation when we already have high NPR? The central bank will come and through Monetary Policy Committee to say that we have a mandate to combat inflation. Already, we've continued to increase NPR by MPC so that we can bring down inflation. So increasing minimum wage, even with the recent announcement when it's paid, is going to push up inflation. The central bank may say they want to further tighten. When they tighten, it means we're trying to adjust money supply. The question is, adjusting money supply will necessitate contraction in the economy. If it is persistent, it may lead to a contraction. And when that contraction persists for a long time, 2, 3, 4 quarters, and there are no productivity, please underline my word, productivity, to compensate with the current increase in money supply, unfortunately, Nigeria may go into a recession. Don't believe me? Study what South Africa experienced between 2001 to 2003. Continuous increase in exchange rate because of increase in money supply. Continuous increase in monetary policy rate because of increase in money supply took South Africa into a recession. South Africa is another African country, but of course they are partially out, even though the growth rate is still very small. And again, when you look at the inconsistent increase in NPR, it's not just about this administration, even the previous administration. Towards the end of the previous administration, you have seen NPR stood at 14%, which was the highest in recent history. Now, we even have more than all of the things that we saw from the previous administration. What happens to growth? Growth averaged about 2.5 to 2%. What happens to growth today is still less than 3%. But what happens to population growth rate? Population growth rate is between 2.67% to 3%. Are we really growing at all? The answer is no. So on one decision, whenever we increase the minimum wage, which I'm recommending, should never be less than 100,000. But it does not mean that it will suddenly end in good news all of a sudden. We will have it will have necessary implication. One of them is inflation. If Monetary Policy Authority does not converge with the fiscal authority, then definitely you would have increase in NPR, which if it persists for a long time, you might see a recession coming to Nigeria. Perhaps maybe next year, maybe later this year, until we check in our lab to check the econometrics, the numbers, then we can tell you around which quarter this may happen.
Mr. Elijah, let's take advantage of your understanding of how these things work and begin to go back to some of the things we've done. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we have to do some rethinking. For a developing economy like ours, now we're fourth largest, we're no longer the biggest economy by the numbers, less than 300 billion in terms of value of our GDP. Privatizing assets, liberalizing markets in a bid to taper inflation doesn't really work for developing economy. That's what brought us here.
Well, when we say we privatize assets and we liberalize, for developing economy, it does not really work. And it does not mean that it cannot work. It does not really work because of method. I give you an example of where privatization and liberalization has worked. Look at telco. It has worked in that sector. But when you look at energy, and when you look at telco, again, economics does not assume that you are going to have a regional monopoly of some sort. So, but when you look at energy, what we have is regional monopoly. If I don't want to use AEDC in Abuja, which other electric company can I use? In Lagos, on the mainland, if I don't want to use Ikeja Electric, which other one? Where do I go to? If I don't want to use Eko Electric on the mainland, where do I go to? So I am stuck with some inefficient distribution companies in these areas. Meanwhile, I am supposed to have option. If truly you want to call it privatization, the essence of privatization is to ensure increase in competition and efficiency. But the first leg of this is even competition. It's not there. So how do you now get efficiency when nobody is competing with such organizations? So when we look at policy, it's important we think them through and not just think that, oh, this is what the textbook says. Beyond the textbook, what is the mind, what is on the mind of those authors? What is on the mind of the people in literature? What do they intend to achieve before they come up with such model that we are trying to copy or we are trying to emulate? Because if we don't follow it squarely and the way it should be done, it will end up hurting us. So we have some good things we have done in terms of privatization. But unfortunately, if we don't do them right, they will come back hurting us.
Well, Mr. Alaje, quite a number of issues you have raised. We'll definitely be unpacking them, but let's expand this conversation. We're now being joined by the Secretary General of the Nigeria Labour Congress. Those are the people essentially in the eye of a storm. Comrade Emmanuel Ogbaja joins us virtually this morning. Good morning, Comrade Ogbaja. Welcome to the Morning Brief.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Well, Nigerians have seen just how powerful Labour can be. If there was a lot of doubt to that before now, well, I think lots of doubts have been cleared. But from where you sit, do you feel a sense of accomplishment? Before we get into all of the other nitty-gritties, do you feel a sense of accomplishment, a sense of, yes, well, we promised, we have delivered, we're no more the toothless dog, as they have termed us? So let's begin with that.
No, absolutely not. We've been consistent. The challenge we have is that Nigeria has become so beaten up. People have become so beat up that they just keep looking for soft targets to humiliate and take on. But we have not done anything different. We've done what we have always done across the years. And we've done what trade unions across the globe usually do. So it's a question of perception from people, but clearly we've been consistent, and there's nothing to beat the chest about. We did what we needed to do, and that has always been what we do. But when people keep viewing us from the prism of politics and their own failed dreams, they see us as a soft target to take on, and they ignore the big elephant in the room that is the government, that is the politician. Everybody then pushes their aspirations and imaginations on Labour. So while we keep doing what we have to do, people just imagine that, hey, Labour can really become a regime change agent. That's not what we are. We are policy influencing folks. We are interest determining folks. We are welfare of workers concentrated folks. That's what we are, and was what we had to do.
I imagine you've heard the narrative about people asking, okay, maybe Labour can also protest about insecurity in the country. Maybe that can push the needle, but apparently you're trying to make the point that you seem to be focused in the areas that you seek for redress, as it will be. But let's step back now and talk about the issues that are confronting us presently following the relaxation of the strike. You've since returned to the negotiating table, and I know Labour is looking for a couple of things. See, the good faith of the government, and I'm talking federal, state, and even the private sector employers as well. So good faith is one thing. Something valuable to be added to the 60,000 naira is another thing. Even though Labour had also in its demands talked about the electricity tariff and the banding of people, those were also demands that were made just before the strike started. So maybe you tell us how far that is going, but speak to us about now the new atmosphere which you've probably seen in the negotiating, the tripartite committee. Has anything changed? Do you have a hope, or do you see some concrete change in the attitude, the approach of government in the committee, on the negotiating table, that is?
No, absolutely there is. We live in a country that public officials will rather go to sleep instead of taking their duties head on. They keep avoiding whoever their principal is and think avoidance is a sign of loyalty or a sign of doing well. What has happened in the last 24 hours was what we expected to have happened since December or January. The federal government knew these negotiations will come on. It was placed on the table even when we were discussing subsidy removal. The mantra then was, don't be in a hurry. Minimum wage is across the line, and that will help us put a genuine permanent situation to wage life. And the thing then was the government will make sure that minimum wage is decent. Will make sure that workers' wages are really taken care of, so that we shouldn't go for stopgap palliative, stopgap add-ons. But suddenly, the people who were mounting this at home were doing nothing. You would have had your news carried it that the president has given the Minister of Finance and coordinating minister matching orders. It's strange for a program they knew that was going to be on. They didn't go to get a proper brief, proper mandate from the president. So they had to wait for a nationwide strike to go get proper briefing and proper mandate. That's the pain we have. Because we take our own work serious. When they put all those matters on the table during the palliative discussions, we are quiet. We looked forward to having the government work with us to put a decent wage regime for the country. And to then imagine that they went back home and did nothing, whether they felt the day will never come. And that is the sad thing we have. We want public officials to take their work seriously. Take whatever statement you make to people seriously. Don't take, it's not campaign, it's not a politicking, it's not policy, it's not governance. So when you tell your people that we're going to impact decently on your wages, go home and work that out. Don't think it will just be left flying in the air. So they were caught pants down their own position. They weren't ready for the negotiation, and that was what pushed us. So clearly now there is a new vibe, both in and outside the negotiating room, which is what it should have been from the word go. So we are pleased with the turn of events, and we hope that our country can genuinely begin to look after its working people.
All right, so let me come to you now, Mr. Alaje. I'd like to take you up on your point about the consequences upon pushing, the snooker board. Speaking of which, let's look at it from the perspective of government's ability to, take decisions, sometimes by fiat, that, also have implications, and wonder why it becomes difficult when it comes to matters of minimum wage. For instance, recall the time that the government took a supplementary budget with implications about 2.1 trillion naira for the purchase of vehicles. There's been uproar also in recent times about the amount being spent on pilgrimages. So the question is, are we really being frontal, calling a spade what it is, if we're saying that it is difficult for government to agree to a minimum wage that is higher than 100,000, maybe by about 20,000 naira, because of the implications that it would have on the wage bill for the federal government? Don't you think that government can actually commit to a fair minimum wage for workers if the reductions in the needless items on its wage bill are implemented?
I strongly believe government can pay the minimum wage of 100,000 or a little bit above that, and I mean the federal government. The question is, how many states can pay that money? Even though with what state collects today, they can pay, but it would mean that most states, we have nothing left for infrastructure or their capital expenditure. Here is it. When we make policy, it's important for us, and I also speak to labor, it's important for us to know what implication we follow. Today, unlike what we have done before, where we share 1.1 to 1.4 trillion at FAC, today we are sharing about 1.8 trillion to about 2 trillion plus at FAC. Now, what we do not know, that even though as government we are having more money, but the economy is becoming tougher for the people. It's becoming real stress for people. Now that the people want more money, especially organized labor, those who work within this federal structure, I mean federal, state, and also local government structure. And we have to pay them more money. Now, if we remove such money at, say, 90, 100, 120,000 as minimum wage. Recall that we are still talking minimum wage. A university professor today is earning average of about $10. You know, in Nigeria, that is not what you pay people outside this environment. Did I say 10? Maybe $8 per day as a university professor. That's not what you pay outside this environment. So when the minimum wage is adjusted, it will now have implication on all of those. When government don't compensate accordingly in ratio, what you are going to have is that by next year, ASU will go on strike. When ASU says they want to relax their strike, the NMA will go on strike. When NMA say they want to, so you are going to have series of strikes. If this is not compensated to adjust the true figure of what people were earning at the realm of 30,000. I did not just know this because it's a presumption. No, President Jonathan experienced it. President Buhari experienced it. So it's a pattern that you see from smaller component or sub-component of union. And just wait, I'm talking of about 28 thereabouts months from now. You are going to be seeing these unions go back. They will say, okay, if this is the minimum wage, it has not really reflected on our income. Then you are going to see doctors and nurses and pharmacists also have their disputes that no, the arrangement have to be different. And that is why labor needs to look at this holistically. If truly we would say an end has come to strikes and picketing and all other actions that are usually carried out by labor. But here is it. What should we have done? What should labor have done? And labor can start doing this from today. What should federal government have done? We need to agree to a minimum standard of education in Nigeria. Because when I earn income, on what do I spend it? I have to pay school fees. Can I have quality primary education that is relatively free? So that my income will be used on other things.
Speaking of what labor should have done, labor is here with us now, and I'd like to take it to him with specific references to if labor amid these negotiations is prevailing on government to also lead by example. I mean, government has been saying these are current difficulties. We need Nigerians to tighten their belt. Is labor also asking government to tighten its belt and cut down on all those needless luxuries in their own budget? Mr. Gwaja.
Of course, clearly those kind of suggestions and advice do come on the table when we're talking with them. But you know, it's even in their own enlightened self-interest to do that, because that is why we're pushing for a decent wage regime. Because if you have a decent wage regime, you have less to play football with. You have less to toy with. You have less to steal. Because it's been sad. Each time people talk about wage, the normal reference or the normal talk from government, particularly the states, where they will tell you, insignificant number, we won't be able to have money to do infrastructure. We know that that is a lie. They have said that we'll have real life situations where you can clearly point to the fact that is a lie. Zamfara could not pay minimum wage, but the moment he left office, the EFCC was chasing him for 300 billion fraud, 300 billion stealing. That was state money. That was money, if he had paid workers, there won't be anything to steal. Kogi was doing the same thing, but he had about $1 million to pay school fees in advance. So when we try to defend them, when people put up the talk, they won't have money to spend on infrastructure, that is a huge lie. That is not correct. That is not correct. The money that you pay to workers will circulate within the economy. It's the money you pay to workers that will boost production. If you give workers the money, the workers will go to the market and they'll buy stuff. And the manufacturers and the producers will have their goods taken up, and then they can go to get more. So it's sad when we continue to shield our leaders by giving them excess money to play with. A human being will keep $2 billion and over as security fund. Unexplainable. And we know it's not nice. Everybody knows the worker is suffering. A worker goes to work, then he needs an uncle to pay his rent. A worker goes to work, he needs an auntie to pay his children's school fees. A worker goes to work, he needs a neighbor to transport him to work. That is not wage situation. That is slavery. We want a situation where what you give to the worker can then take care of his needs. He is not asking for luxury. like the computation we're doing is clear. If you place 500 naira a meal, even on the negotiating table, nobody, not the National Assembly that invited us, not the federal government top brass we're negotiating with, will even give a 500 naira a plate food to their dog. No. So when we then put negotiations on a situation, you're pleading with people to make 500 naira a meal available to a worker. It's sad, because it then makes us look like we're negotiating, we are aliens, negotiating with owners of the land who don't see us as worth staying with them, rather than citizens asking their nation to do something for them. Minimum wage, national minimum wage, what it means is the wage a country says a worker in my sovereign entity can't earn less than that. Anybody that goes by the word a worker shouldn't be paid below this if he's working. The rest you can do as welfare to unemployed, to physically challenged people or all this. But when a human being answers a worker in your territory, that this is the least you need to pay. And what that list should do is the least the person needs to exist.
All right, Mr.
We're not giving it.
All right, Mr. Let's take it back to Mr. Alaji. Mr. Alaji, I would like you to land on your thoughts on the issue that you were raising, because we need to prepare for post-wage increase era, which sometimes we fail to do when it comes to scenario planning. Maybe you can explain to us even further from where you left off what we should be looking at across board.
Okay, so I quickly need to respond to Comrade. I never said that labor should not be paid. And if you have followed me on Twitter, that is X, you see my presentation even as recent as yesterday, what I think labor should be paid. I am by no means supporting those who have milked their states dry and who are greedy, who have refused to put money in the pocket of people, which of course legitimately should be theirs. But I'm saying labor has a responsibility. The responsibility of labor is to ensure that there is high quality education so that you don't have to start paying school fees for people. Labor has a responsibility to ensure that we have a public infrastructure. The way you shut down the whole nation 2 days ago, you will have a responsibility to have a public transport system. I don't have to go on private taxi. If we have a functional public transport system, in those days, they were called TCTC. What happened to the labor of those days and labor of these days? That we cannot have public transport system that can take people from their home to work. What happened to quality health? What happened to them? Primary health care. These are the things that labor should come out openly to discuss with government. Because when we don't have them, and I don't mean just federal government, local government, state government, and local and federal government, the three levels, we must have this conversation. We must have improvement in these key areas. Look at electricity. We said band A people are those that should pay 200 and something % more. But where is the electricity? They said if we don't have light up to 20 hours, light was shut down due to industrial action. And I know a lot of places, based on survey, that band A people have not had light. What happened to band B? What happened to band C? Are we saying they don't? So these are arguments that I expect labor to have, not only when it comes to wage, even though wage increase right now is a necessity in Nigeria. If you check what is happening in other countries, including Nigeria, including Tanzania, how much people are paid, and what is the quality of life in those environments, that's exactly what I'm referring to. And just to correct a notion, that you put more money in the pocket of labor does not mean to necessarily aggravate production. It's economics. It will certainly increase consumption. The question will now be, where is the consumption product coming from? Nigeria or abroad? We are speaking today on television. This TV people are watching, are they made in Nigeria or made abroad? These are conversations labor must have. How do we boost industrial activity in Nigeria? How do we partner with Manufacturing Association of Nigeria? How do we partner with key stakeholders to ensure that we boost productivity? How do we ensure that even labor working in government, they become more productive? Not that you get to people's desk and they are missing. And they are not there. So I support labor's argument completely, even though based on available information and data, labor should not earn less than 100,000 today. Doing that, we want to compensate people in poverty, hunger, and deprivation. I so submit.
Well, his question was also regarding some other issues raised, but just so we can better manage time, let me go back to Comrade. I imagine you want to respond as well, but I also want you to add to the fact that earlier on, I had mentioned that there were two other items that you were fighting for. It wasn't just the minimum wage, the electricity tariff as well, and the banding of customers. So are you abandoning that? Is that also being talked about in the negotiation? Or are we going to see another strike action to resolve that?
You know, that is the challenge. I love the Economist in your studio. He's progressive. He's pro-workers. But he still has the mentality of the average Nigerian that sees Labour as an opposition party. We're not an opposition party. We're a trade union. All the items he listed that Labour should be championing are items that the citizens should be asking from their government. Labour is not the only person feeling it. Ironically, when we got to the National Assembly and we're discussing electricity tariffs, the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, and their colleagues, the entire leadership, were on the same force with us. They were on the same page with us. But the electricity tariff challenge was not right. They told, fortunately, the Minister of Power was in the federal government, the executive team that came, and they told him in very clear terms that policy needs to be reversed. Genuinely, if they were doing their work as representatives of the people, they should be able to push that. So, but that's what happens, and then people put Labour into the eye of the storm, and then people begin to run strange commentaries. People want to wait until Labour goes on strike before citizens will get what is their rightful needs with regards to it. People want to wait for Labour to go on strike before there can be housing in the country. People want to wait for Labour to go on strike before you can provide public transport services. No, that is the function of government. And when people are then voting for government, you should interrogate the politicians, interrogate the government. What are you bringing to the table? Don't go to sleep. People vote for religion. People vote for tribe. People vote for anything except asking the people, what will you do for us? We had a president who gleefully was telling us, of course, I campaigned and told you that subsidy will be gone when I come in. He didn't do any homework on what was to be done. He took out the subsidy and then the homework started. And Nigerians are at the initial time when we oppose, they say, oh, Labour, wait. The government is just new. Allow them, they know what they're doing. Right now, we know they don't know what they're doing with regards to that. So we must learn. Don't wait. Everybody puts their hand in their pocket and wait to see what Labour will do. As citizens, we must all stand up and be counted. Then Labour's capacity as a well-oiled civil society organization, as a well-oiled, globally known and recognized interest group, can then bring some of the experience to bear in driving the conversation. But it shouldn't be left on the laps of Labour alone. If not, like President Tinubu did, he told NLC president, wait till 2027, then he can come and contest against. He gets aside. And then people...
So I find this quite interesting because when you went on strike, it affected the whole nation. Like the whole nation was crippled. So it was like one for all or all for one, as the case may be. So is it wrong for Labour to take on those other issues since everybody in solidarity, either by suffering, by missing their flight, by not having power, some didn't have access to healthcare, they joined in it. So isn't it unfair to now say, well, for other issues, you sort yourself, let's just sort our own? Because when you think about it, even the workers in Nigeria, totally, are you up to 5 million?
You are a worker. Workers in Nigeria are more than 5 million.
Well, you're not fighting for me. I'm not earning minimum wage, comrade.
Yeah, any minimum wage. You belong to the Nigerian Union of Journalists.
No, you're fighting for a minimum wage earners. I'm not earning a minimum wage.
That's why I want to get you to understand the concept of minimum wage. If the minimum wage is 15,000, you in channels, you won't end up to 100,000 naira. The minimum wage needs to be responsible. In computing, it's the least you pay to the least earning worker. It's from there that people do what they call consequential adjustment. Then those of you in the private sector can earn the kind of wages you're earning. You're not going to earn any big wage if the average salary in Nigeria is down at the bottom. No. So when we're fighting for minimum wage, it ends up being for everybody. The point I'm making is we are determined. We'll continue to do that. But people shouldn't think that it's the exclusive preserve of labor to do that. Because that is why when we then call for action, we're pleading with people, they go home. They turn on their TVs, they arrange pepper soup for themselves, and then begin to ask, is labor out there in the street yet? Have they come out in the street? That is not what it should be. When citizens feel aggrieved about any government policy, they should speak up. They should when we then say we're providing the leadership, they should join us. They shouldn't abandon us. So like I said, in the issue of electricity, we're taking it head on. There is no way, even when you give us minimum wage and you have that funny tariff, there will be nothing left. It means we'll just pay for electricity, then trek to work. You pay for electricity, and then you won't eat food. You pay for electricity, you won't be able to get medication for you and your family. You pay electricity bill, you won't get any clothing. So for us, it's a balance. We'll continue to provide that leadership. But the plea I'm making is that Nigerians should begin to learn to interrogate their leaders. Don't make it is a labor versus government. No.
Indeed, your sentiments are well understood, Mr. Ogbaja, but Kaode's question is also instructive, especially in the light of Labour's June 2023 15-point demand on federal government to, make life comfortable for Nigerians after the removal of fuel subsidy. Most of the items on that list have not been fulfilled, and we've hardly seen Labour, done due diligence in the last 12 months to follow up on those demands. It's important to call out Labour on that. I'm going to come to you, but let's go to Mr. Laji now. Mr. Laji, I imagine that you also have, a response to Mr. Ogbaja on that point about your disposition towards some of these issues.
Just about the entire Nigerians. I think Mr. Ogbaja needs to read the National Bureau of Statistics report. First of all, know the total number of people that are within the labor force and those that are unemployed. Remove that from the labor force and know people that are working. For people that are working, whether directly or indirectly, you may want to ask them to labor, but if labor becomes discriminatory and say only those that work for government are those that are labor or those that work in organized private sector, then it will be a huge concern. Here is the point. There is what we call money illusion. Even if government pay this money to labor today, and you don't discuss quality education available for all, free, which of course is stated in the Constitution, free primary education, free secondary education, but the Constitution put it as soon as practicable. When will it be practicable? When we can pay for privileges in billions of naira? When will it be practicable for people to have quality education? An issue of health. So if you are saying that that is the issue of an average Nigeria, which body unifies Nigeria? When labor needs things, they come to Nigerians. These flights that were shut down on Abuja, Lagos, Enugu, and other places, how many people are non-labor that have missed their flight or could not meet up with their appointments? How many people would like to go to the hospital and they cannot access this help? And that is why labor should not even speak to demand, a divided front. If you want to achieve something, whatever you achieve is not just for yourself. It's for the entire Nigerians. And if there are issues that will not make us to come back to this point again, which includes, can we have strong institutions? Can we have quality infrastructure, especially public transport system? We have heard the issue of government bringing CNG, even though that in countries that produce them by 1930, they will no longer be in vogue. And I saw Labour even argue vehemently for why CNG should be everywhere. Now, how many CNG are plying our roads today? From Warri to Lagos, from Lagos to Calabar, Calabar to Sokoto, to Maiduguri, and different parts of Nigeria. Only recently I saw the governor of Niger State, commission some of these CNG. But how many of them in the real sense of it? Can we have this mass transit? Whatever means you want to use to run them, can we have them on board? Because if we don't, we will come back after 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years again and say we are fighting for another minimum wage. And that will mean that we are all struggling from what we call money illusion. So it is not just the amount that matters. As an economist, it is the value. It is what the money can buy. When we were given 30,000 naira, we said that it used to be 18,000 naira. We shifted to 30,000 naira. And what can the 30,000 naira buy? 2 bags of rice or 1.5 bags of rice. Today, if the government has paid above 60,000, say it's 70,000, say it's 80,000, a bag of rice is around 80,000. Is it even up to 30,000 naira? And we're saying for us not to come back to this place again, Labour must say, this is what we are spending our money on. Can government build a system that we have strong value for some of the things that we are buying? And that's exactly, I think, will be the solution to Labour, because it's not going to be cheap for government to do it. We have to
Mr. Alaje, let's take it to Mr. Agbaja. Mr. Agbaja, there are key issues here. What Mr. Alaje is raising, the issues of legacy issues, which if they are sorted, electricity, road infrastructure, healthcare, education, minimum wage will make sense at the end of the day. Perhaps the argument here is that Labour, people are seeing them as being a bit selfish because some of the things they should raise in terms of legacy issues, they are not coming to the fore. Condemnable as it was, Mr. Joe Ajero was beaten up in Owerri, and Labour went on strike. Doctors are kidnapped. We've not seen Labour go on strike as a union. So those are the arguments people are having, not that people are against Labour at the end of the day. So is Labour thinking of expanding their agitation just beyond how much gets into their pocket to reducing how much they will spend if legacy issues are sorted?
You know, we're going back to where I started, where we've closed our minds. We've refused to open our minds. What I'm saying is Labour key to pushing the narrative with regards to policy direction and policy implementation and their outcomes. But the funny thing is citizens, you know, when you talk that people couldn't fly, people couldn't fly because the workers withdrew their work. It's not because the people that couldn't fly were making sacrifices. No. I don't know how we're perceiving it. When a worker withdraws his services, you can't get that service. But the same thing, when citizens withdraw their support, you can't get a government that lost it over them. That's the point I want us to understand. And we keep refusing to acknowledge that. We want to push us into the realm of politics, which is what this is about. You have a government that is insensitive. And there is a way the conversation gets to, it becomes political. You have a government that is not delivering to the people. And rather than face the government, people want to rope in Labour into the conversation. We should be talking of voting at a government that is not meeting our expectations. But when that time comes, people will tell you about who has money to rent private jets to move across the country.
All right.
Looted money.
All right, Mr.
If I tell you that Labour will provide the government, people will say no. But we've been providing the alternative,
Mr. Agbaja,
to what's done.
My apologies. We're totally out of time because there's a lot to talk about, but we're totally out of time. But before we go, in just 10 seconds, Nigerians want to be clear on what Labour means by it is not suspended, it's relaxed. What does that mean?
It means if the understanding we had with the government and the position from the highest level, we respect there's a government in place. If the president of the Federal Republic says, I will do this, we expect him to do that. That was why we said, let's defer to the commitment of the president. And if we then find that that is, let's just get them off our back right now, then we'll get back to the streets. We'll get back to walk to rule. That's what we mean. We don't need to go giving any further notices because the issue has not been resolved. So there is no point saying you're suspending when the issue has not been resolved. So there's no point.
Just to be clear, so we know about calling off a strike. We know about suspending a strike. They're two different things.
Yes.
But this relaxing is a new term in the whole, labor employer relationship. So what is there a new backing to this? Is there a new provision in labor law that allows the relaxation? Because suspended is a term we're used to.
it's equivalent to what you have. Now we have gone to the old national anthem. And if you were lucky to have read, you realize that there were things called stop and pause button in some funny cassette players we used to have. So what we are at pause. And that's what we have.
Which is a suspension.
Which is a suspension. Mr. Gwaja, Mr. Gwaja, I think it's Mr. Gwaja, I think it's just semantics here, because you're not doing any work. At the end of the day, you have gone back to work. Not like you say, National Grid people don't go to work today. Airport go to work. So anyway, at the end of the day, Labour has gone back to work. Let's see what plays out in the next 1 week. We must thank you, Comrade Emmanuel Gwaja, Secretary General of the Nigerian Labour Congress, as well as Mr. Paul Alaje, the senior economist, SPM professionals, who joined us via from our Abuja studio, I should say, Mr. Paul Alaje. Both of you gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program. We appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a quick break. We're not done with the issue of labor. We're going to, take another direction to this conversation in terms of productivity. Join us again.
All the talk about minimum wage, ensuring that workers in Nigeria earn something substantial, at least to get them home. Well, whether or not it would take them home is another conversation entirely, but something substantial to afford the basic necessities of life. But on the flip side of that conversation is productivity. You'll have heard the earlier conversation we had, and Mr. Paul Alaje was talking about how productivity needs to follow, else we'll find ourselves in a recession. So this morning, we're talking productivity, and we have joining us in our studio the president of a Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, CIPM, Mr. Ahmed Ladan Gobir. He's right here with us in our Lagos studio. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Morning Brief.
Good morning, Eddie. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I know that this is something you deal with on a daily basis, particularly as human resource managers or personal managers, as the case may be, the negotiation. This is how much I want to earn, or this is how much we can afford, and it goes back and forth. But this is on a bigger scale, and we've seen how much it has affected us as a nation. So I'd like to get your thoughts about the approach of government and labor to this minimum wage negotiation. Is this really the most optimal way to approach it?
Okay, thank you very much once again. The law in Nigeria, of course, favors tripartism. The law requires that after maybe 5 years, in the case of the current, the Minimum Wage Act, which expired April, that parties, tripartite parties to the minimum wage discussion, of course, will come to the table to negotiate a new national minimum wage, for workers in the country. Tripartism, of course, means you have the government on the one side, you have the employer associations on one side, and of course, the labor. So these three parties are expected to come to the negotiating table, of course, to discuss a new minimum wage and set one, of course, recommend one to the government, which then, of course, takes it to the National Assembly through a bill, which the National Assembly, of course, then enacts into a law. So, yes, talking about the process of course, enacting a new law for the minimum wage, what the law requires and expects is what was initiated by the government, which of course culminated in the discussions that have been going on, between the parties involved in the discussion.
I wonder how you're taking in the 400,000 naira or 60,000 naira debate as an HR professional. And you've been doing this, as I said, for a while now. Any thoughts on what should be the appropriate minimum wage, or at least what should guide what factors should guide what will be the appropriate minimum wages? I would like to hear it. You have a figure or a range that you're also looking at. Don't forget, it also concerns the private sector as well. That's what we hear.
Okay. Thank you again, Kayode. First, let me say that I'm speaking as president of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management. And I would like to say that at the onset of the current discussion and in the ongoing attempt to review the national minimum wage, the CIPM was approached by the National Salary, Incomes and Wages Commission to submit a memorandum, on about 4 or 5 critical areas. One, of course, is to recommend what we think should be the appropriate minimum wage. The other is to speak to the frequency of the review, of the minimum wage. The third is around enhancing and increasing productivity, whether in the private sector or in the public sector. The fourth is around sanctions for violations, of the Minimum Wage Act. And we did work on a presentation, a memorandum which we submitted to the Tripartite Committee, of course, through the National Salary, Incomes and Wages Commission. I'm unable to speak to the details of what we recommended because, of course, that now forms a working document, for the Tripartite Committee. But yes, as a body and as a professional institute, we did make recommendations to the Tripartite Committee on what we think should be the ideal minimum wage. Of course, our recommendation, of course, was informed, by several economic indices, the Consumer Price Index, the GDP rate at the time, the electricity tariff, which we know affects everybody, whether you're in the private sector or in the public sector, and several other, economic indices that we think, of course, should be used to benchmark a minimum wage, for the country. And so we did make a recommendation. Like I said, that is before the Tripartite Committee now, and I'm sure that they did take this into consideration in the course of their discussion. Whether what we recommended is what is out there on the part of the committee or what Labour is asking for, it's a completely different thing. But yes, we did make some recommendations.
And it shouldn't be below your recommendation, or they are above it?
I will say that we did make what, as a professional body, we believe is a very reasonable and rational recommendation. And I dare say that as things are now, we also strongly believe as a professional body that what eventually will be agreed by the parties to this discussion will be very close to what we recommended as CIPM.
Well, expectations are high about what will eventually be the middle ground between Labour and the government, and how democratic that will be in terms of, the spread across the 36 states of the Federation is another kettle of fish entirely. But let's get to productivity now, sir. And, amid this negotiation, there's been talk from the federal government about the implication of a new minimum wage and possibility that, government will be spending about 24 trillion naira as wage bill over the next 3 years. And you can do the calculation and know how much that will amount to annually. But the question really is for more than 540 ministries, departments, and parastatals of the government. Let's even look at federal government in the first instance before we go to the states. Is that amount justified in terms of the quality of service delivered to Nigerians by the civil service, which is the engine room that executes the vision of the federal government?
Well, for those in the private sector, and productivity may mean completely different thing to them as compared to those, who work, say, in the public service. As a professional institute, we believe that whether in the public sector or in the private sector, productivity should be that which moves the needle, that which delivers quality service and improves the quality of life, for the worker, whether in the public service or also in the private sector. Now, we think that, and we suggest, and we've always recommended, that we are at a point where perhaps the public service and the civil service in Nigeria should be leaner than it currently is. A lot of people believe that we do have an overbloated public service, and it's the reason why, of course, the Oronsai committee was set up. We've had talks around the government wanting to streamline the numbers of ministries and MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies of government. We believe that the intention may not necessarily be to rationalize the workforce, but of course it will be to also reduce the over-bloated expenditure of government around the number of ministries, departments, and agencies that they have. And when this reduces, this money, of course, the savings can be plowed, into several other things. Now, because of the proliferation and the multiplicity of departments and agencies that we have, the perception is that a lot, of these departments and agencies and those who work there are somewhat inefficient. So what we advocate, is for a lot of improvement, of course, in the efficiency of those who work, say, in the public service. Now, in the organized private sector or in the private sector generally, even in the informal sector, which employs, an even larger, percentage of Nigerians than either the government or the organized private sector, you have KPIs set. Every employee knows what their deliverables are supposed to be, and they are evaluated on the basis of what they then deliver, based on the KPIs, based on the deliverables, based on the tasks that have been agreed with the employer. Now, and in the private sector, this is done in such a way that it is also very smart, smart in the sense that you are sure that, whatever deliverables or KPIs have been agreed are such that are measurable, and that at the end of the day, they are also time bound. So you are able to say, look, you have delivered on X, Y, Z, and you can earn this reward. If you do not deliver, I can hold you accountable. Now, do we see that happen, in the government? This is not to say that you do not have performance evaluations happening in the government. I mean, that does happen. But again, it is in the government that we know that people expect that if I have spent 3-4 years on a particular grade, I should automatically be promoted. It's completely different, in the...
Whether or not I'm being productive.
Exactly, whether or not I'm being productive. So I think there should be a lot of emphasis, on productivity, what people can see, and of course making our public service and our civil service a lot more efficient and a lot more responsive, of course, to the needs.
So that brings us to that particular issue. You've touched on it, but I would like you to expand on it. The DG of the National Productivity Center, so I think he raised that issue about performance-based salary scheme. Yeah. For you, from your analytics right now, is this long overdue? Because as you've alluded, it's more like promotion and increase in pay should just be based on longevity in service, which is what is obtainable now. We're not saying people are not excellent at their work, but if we must improve productivity, is this time to really implement this beyond just talk shop?
I think now is the time. Well, the time to do this is, long before now. I think the time is ripe to make the National Productivity Center, answer its true name. That is, empower the center to actually work to measure, productivity, in the public service, and report, to the government. This, we believe, of course, will help not only in evaluating, of course, the performance of ministries, departments, and agencies generally, or the performance of employees, whether, in government ministries, in government departments or agencies. But we believe that it also will help in benchmarking, and in determining even the budgeting process, for the country. Not capital expenditure, but even our recurrent expenditure budgets, which of course will include things like salaries and wages, compensation and benefits. So yes, we think that the time to do this, was yesterday, not today.
So let's put an example to it, because as you're speaking, I'm thinking about the size of the civil service and the bottlenecks and the bureaucracy and all of the elements involved. Let's take a sector. How do you want to assess a judge? If we implement these KPIs, how do you want to assess a judge? Is it based on the judgments that is delivered that are not contentious? What exactly, if you're the professional here, if you were to talk to the National Productivity Center, how to assess a judge of a magistrate court or high court? Some basics you need to look at.
Okay, first I think I would like to speak to the fact that if we're speaking about the courts and the judiciary, we must also be looking at what tools do they have to deliver, on the expectations of Nigerians or the expectations of litigants who go before them. Are these judges very well equipped, to do the jobs, that we have asked them to do? I'm a lawyer, incidentally, so I do know, for example,
that makes it easy for us.
I do know, for example, that if you speak about a magistrate or a judge, it's in so many of our jurisdictions, our magistrates and our judges still write, in longhand in courts. They have to listen to lawyer A, lawyer B speak, and they write, in longhand. This in itself, of course, takes a lot of time, So are we looking at the possibility of ensuring that we digitalize even our court systems, such that we ease the burden, that our judicial officers, whether at the magistracy or even at the superior courts, currently carry in discharging their duties? Have we looked at the possibility of not always having to bring accused persons or people who have been accused of some crime, always transporting them from the prisons to the courts, where the magistrates or the judges, adjudicate? Can we leverage digital technology, as is done in other jurisdictions, to have accused persons, for example, take their pleas or even appear virtually, right, before judges? If we do all of this, then maybe we can begin to ask, of our judges whether or not they are actually doing what they are supposed to do in terms of productivity.
Right.
Whether or not they are delivering, as they should deliver. How many of them have legal assistants who are well equipped and well trained to conduct research, to support the work of the judges.
Well, Jeffrey obviously touched on a soft spot for you, and you was as though you were waiting for it. But this goes across board, across other sectors. But it's important to just try to localize them. But since we're leaning on your experience that you have, you've also been a commissioner, right? A state commissioner, and this conversation is not just for federal government; it's also for states. They play a huge role in all of this. They probably have perhaps more workers than the federal government. The data is tough to find on that one, or equal when you put them together. I will come to the private sector, which again you sort of represent in some sense. Why has it been tough for state governments? Because you were commissioner for industry, commerce, industry, and corporate. Exactly. So you understand the money, how the money moves out. It translates into productivity. Why is it always tough for state governments to pay? Imagine some are not even paying 30,000 naira, and I imagine that the excuse they will have is, if not paid 30,000 naira, how can we pay this 60,000+? So does any state have should they make that excuse? I think that's the question, that they can't pay.
Okay, Kayode, thank you for that question. At the time I was commissioner, that was I left office in 1999, May. I was in the government that handed over to the civilians. My ministry, just like you said, was called Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Cooperatives. That ministry, after we left office and politicians took over, was balkanized into about 4 ministries. And of course, so jobs were created for everybody, for so many people. So of course, you do have an increase in the number of employees in the state. And this happened as it did in my state, as with so many other states. Most of the states, except for a state like Lagos, like Rivers, and a few others, depend on allocations from the Federal Allocation Committee, the FAC. They depend on subventions. Their internally generated revenue is very low. Yes, there may have been some improvements over the course of time, but that again is neither here nor there. So at the end of the day, most of the states actually use the subvention, to pay salaries. And that's where you have very little, of course, to spend on infrastructure development and for other capital expenditure. It's the reason why you have so many states unable to pay their counterpart funding to TED fund, to access fund for improving, educational facilities in the state. So for states that are unable to increase and improve their IGR, it then becomes impossible for them to pay even the minimum wage. The law, of course, expects that once the minimum wage is agreed, because the states as subnationals are also party to the conversation. Incidentally, I was a part of the tripartite committee. I was a member of the tripartite committee on the review of the minimum wage from the 2017-20, the one that bathed the 30,000 naira. So I know, for example, that on that committee, apart from representatives of the federal government, we had 6 state governors, representing the 6 geopolitical zones. There were hues and cry around, we will not be able to pay the 30, whatever it is you are recommending. But at the time at which we concluded the discussions then, we were all agreed, on the 30,000 which was recommended.
And no states raised objections that we can't pay.
I do not recall that any of them at that time said, we will not be able to pay.
And were they fully participatory in the meetings?
Exactly. Yeah, they sent. I recall very well that 3 state governors were always there. Others sent their heads of service, to come and attend, and then they will come in.
But were there representatives from across board, the other 36 states of the Federation, even if the governors were not there?
No. The way it is that the governors forum, they nominate their own their representatives. And the nominations were then done across the 6 geopolitical zones.
This question is...
So what I'm saying is, before an agreement, before we came to what we came to at the time, the representatives of the subnationals, just like the representatives of the federal government, and those of us who are representing the organized private sector, had the opportunity to go back to our principles, to say this is where the conversation is going, and this is what we are likely, to agree and to sign off on. So for us, when we then proposed the 30,000 naira, it was a shock, to hear that, there were states that were unable to pay for various reasons. I'm not saying that they may not have their reasons, but whatever the reasons were, of course, there was a conversation around this, and there was an agreement before it was then passed to the federal government, before a bill was prepared, and before it was then enacted into law. What then happened afterward was Labour then had to start going to states, one state after the other, to go and renegotiate, the minimum wage.
The question is important in the light of this round of negotiations, because Labour is taking issue with states for not being present at this round of negotiations, and it's quite telling about what it would mean for whatever wages agreed upon. But it's a good thing that to know that you are part of the negotiation team for the 2017 to 2019 minimum wage negotiation. So please give us an insight into what the parameters were at that time for the breakdown and arrival at 30,000 naira. Perhaps to give us an understanding of what government is, what government's thinking is for 60,000 naira or whatever figure will be arrived at.
Okay, I will not be able to speak to what the thinking is now to arrive at that, but I think for every negotiation, what is most important and paramount, whether in the organized private sector or in the public sector, is affordability, the ability to pay. And this is why at all times, as HR practitioners and as a professional body, we always encourage parties to come, to the table with their hands open. Like we say, he who must come to equity must come with clean hands. That you put all your indices, you put all the points that you have, all the reasons that you have, all the data, that you have on the table for the other party to see. Decisions, like we always say as HR professionals, must be data driven. When you come to a negotiation, you must be able to show the other party that, look, this is where we stand. If we have to pay this much, this is what it will cost us. This is the implication, So decisions must be data driven. I would imagine and I would expect that with the current committee too, all of this, data would have been placed before members of the committee. I do not know whether there are parties to the discussion who have not been attending the conversation. But as an institute, CIPM, for example, the memorandum that we submitted, not only took cognizance of all, like I said, consumer price index, the GDP from 2019 to 2023, how the inflation index and how it has impacted the 30,000 naira that was approved, was enacted into law from 2019 to 2023. What is the value of 30,000 naira now? I mean, based on the inflation. This was what informed the recommendations that we made, as an institute to the tripartite committee. And in addition to that, is that we also feel that, as it is done in the organized private sector, discussions or wage reviews, in the organized private sector, for example.
I wanted to speak because you're already going to it, so I wanted you to expand. We don't have so much time now.
Yes.
Companies are divesting. Some are even closing down.
Yes.
And we're trying to do a scenario planning of post-wage increase scenario here because of what may happen. If companies are already divesting and closing down, what then happens to organized private sector if, let's say, we get to 100,000?
Okay. Again, let me go back to our recommendation. Our recommendation at CIPM also we did a number of scenarios. For example, in the submission that we made to the committee. Now, for the organized private sector, it is unlikely, for example, that you will find businesses that are paying below what may eventually be agreed, even when the tripartite committee completes its work. Yes, and this is because the organized private sector has a mechanism, for reviewing wages and compensation of employees in the organized private sector. And that is done, of course, through collective bargaining between the industrial unions in the respective sectors and the employer organizations that you have. Now, because of these constant reviews, sometimes it is done over a period of 2 years, 3 years, not 5 years as you have, with the national minimum wage. So you have constant reviews, in the organized private sector. So, like I said, it is unlikely, that you will have
those that are...
Yes. So the argument will then be, now, if, for example, the tripartite committee now settles for, say, 100,000, and that is enacted into law, when this comes out, the tendency, or there's a likelihood, that there are people also, or businesses in the organized private sector who will say, well, we're already paying above.
In any case. So
exactly.
It doesn't have... But
exactly, 100,000.
We will not take away the fact that they are, pardon me, facility staff, for example, those you can describe as cleaners, security workers who are still earning maybe 40,000, 50,000. So do you expect, because people are asking, what's the need for me? I don't work for government, but I work in the private sector and I'm earning maybe 30 or 40,000 naira. Should that also affect them if it is now 100,000 naira? Should they be bumped up?
The threshold by law, and unless this is changed, is that, we're talking of people in the informal sector now. The threshold is that the employer or the business must be employing a minimum of 25 employees for them to qualify, for the minimum wage. For businesses that have less than 25, enforcing that, might be
I just wanted to bring that in because a lot of people have been asking, would it reach me as well? But we have to thank you so much. This is by no means the end of a conversation, but at least we're making progress, particularly when it comes to productivity. That will naturally follow. I would like to thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed Ladan Gobiru, President, Chartered Institute of Personnel Management. And let me say congratulations.
Thank you.
You just took office last week.
That's right.
So this is your very first television interview after taking office. I say congratulations and wish you the very best.
Thank you very much, Kayode, and thank you all for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we'll continue this conversation. It's important to pay attention to the productivity bit. But let's talk about what you are saying regarding the issues that we have raised. And this feedback, the very first one, is from Olaoluwa Olonrudun Siolani from Buhari in FCT Abuja. And it's about the conversation around minimum wage. It says the federal government should abide by their agreements to resolve all the issues on minimum wage and electricity tariff within 1 week. Masses are suffering in Nigeria, this user says, ending with God bless Nigeria prayer.
And this next one is from Low Alpha Cross from Aba, who says, I'm not an advocate of increasing workers' salaries irrationally, taking into cognizance inflation. Rather, governments at all levels should try to control the prices of goods and services by encouraging production and reasonably allowing importation of certain critical staple items for now. So that speaks to our topic, Jeffrey.
All right, exactly. So, but the next one has to do with the polls that Kayode raised earlier about designation of our politicians and their offices. They are not to be called honorables until They earn it. Excellency or other interesting titles. All our leaders are not truly leaders. They are rulers. According to Leo Liberty from Lagos.
Well, Abolori follows suit, saying governance is about integrity, commitment, dedication, focus, and selflessness. The name politicians call themselves servant leader, His Excellency. Come on, Arakuri, you even put that the ATC amount to nothing if the man or woman behind the name is dishonest and self-serving. Just say Arakuri in Yoruba means it's just a man, a Mr.
A Mr.
So that's actually the basic. So it's fair to call yourself Arakuri because that's Mr. Anyway.
Well, that reminds us of the late Arakuri. And his soul rest in peace. And this last one, I believe, comes from KB from Takum, Taraba State. And they say, we're yet to see power restoration in Taraba almost 12 hours after NLC suspended the strike. I beg, as appealing to the power companies, if NEPA people don't go farm, make them come back, come restore lights. Now go dig. Well, we hope that that is, attended to sufficiently. It reminds us of some of comments from earlier on which say that they didn't even know that the power grid was shut down. Excuse us? Power distribution companies, please attend to these matters.
Absolutely. We need to do better as governments, whether you're providing a service, people as well. But that's where we anchor on the show as anchors this morning, but not to worry. Sunrise Daily is up next. I'm Kayode Okikulu. To have a great day.
Yes, of course, we have another bumper package coming your way again tomorrow. Join us. I am Bukola Koka.
And that's it for the midweek edition. We're back again, same time tomorrow. God bless you and God bless Nigeria. I'm Jeffrey Uzoma.